Don't send it to me.
Hello, welcome to Heavy D Storytelling. We are going to be reading the Bible today. We are going to be doing a joke of the day with my brother here. And we are going to be doing the synopsis. It's kind of laggy on this, so
Probably because I have too many windows open.
well,
I see one person present. Hi, one person present.
I think it's
I
Mommy.
bet it's Mom.
Two. Mom and,
Two people.
but we are also going to be doing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, as you can see from the title.
Hey
Hi,
guys.
Becca.
Hi, Becca.
Hi, Becca.
Nice of you to join us.
Oh,
We appreciate
that-
you.
Bible link.
Okay, so let me see if I can get this Bible link. Here we go. We're on 48. I think it's 48 this time. No, we did 48 last time, didn't we? Is that right? Yeah, we did 48 last time. I'm sorry. So we're on 49. Ooh. And I think I said we were going to finish today. So, no, that was of the whole book. I mean, of Genesis. So here's the link for Genesis. And let's go ahead and get started. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn. They my might and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence. Because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it, he went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers, weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company, for in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." Hey guys, when there's a lot of movement while I'm reading the Bible, that's really distracting for me, and I'm sure it is for other people too. What you should be doing is sitting down and listening. Why do we go through this so often? Okay, we'll finish chapter 49 tomorrow. The boys aren't really paying attention to it, so we'll just finish the Bible passage tomorrow. And so I think now it's time for the joke of the day. So here's the joke of the day. Here we go. You have to speak louder.
Hello, back with the joke of the day.
We're here again.
Hello, what is your question?
You have to face them. They can't hear you if you're not facing over this way.
Doctor, I feel like a sheep.
That's bad!
That's the joke of the day today. Okay, so now we're going to listen to the synopsis. Here we go, Kimmy.
So, what's been happening in the last few chapters was, so they took their position. They found out they were right on the South Pole, so they go over to leave, and they got stuck in a big block of ice, and there was no way to get out. And I think the next chapter had something to do with air supply. I think they could run low. I'm not sure though. And I think that's about it.
All right. There's the synopsis for today, and now we're going to read. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry, I had a little ADD moment. And all right. Daniel's trying to diagnose me for me. That's nice of him. All right. So, chapter 16, Want of Air. Sorry, I need to move my window just a little bit. It's being slow. Being slow. Why is it being so slow? Okay, there we go. Chapter 16, Want of Air. Thus around the Nautilus, above and below, was an impenetrable wall of ice. We were prisoners to the iceberg. I watched the captain. His countenance had resumed its habitual imperturbability. Gentlemen, he said calmly, there are two ways of dying in the circumstances in which we are placed. This puzzling person had the air of a mathematical professor lecturing to his pupils. The first is to be crushed, the second is to die of suffocation. I do not speak of the possibility of dying of hunger, for the supply of provisions in the Nautilus will certainly last longer than we shall. Let us then calculate our chances. As to suffocation, Captain, I replied, that is not to be feared because our reservoirs are full. Just so, but they will only yield 2 days' supply of air. Now, for 36 hours, we have been bidden under the water, and already the heavy atmosphere of the Nautilus requires renewal. In 48 hours, our reserve will be exhausted. Well, Captain, can we be delivered before 48 hours? We will attempt it, at least, by piercing the wall that surrounds us. On which side? Sound will tell us. I am going to run the Nautilus aground on the lower bank, and my men will attack the iceberg on the side that is least thick. Captain Nemo went out. Soon I discovered by a hissing noise that the water was entering the reservoirs. The Nautilus sank slowly and rested on the ice at a depth of 350 yards, the depth at which the lower bank was immersed. My friends, I said, our situation is serious, but I rely on your courage and energy. Sir, replied the Canadian, I am ready to do anything for the general's safety. Good. Ned, and I held out my hand to the Canadian. I will add, he continued, that being as handy with the pickaxe as with the harpoon, if I can be useful to the captain, he may command my services. He will not refuse your help. Come, Ned. I led him to the room where the crew of the Nautilus were putting on their cork jackets. I told the captain of Ned's proposal, which he accepted. The Canadian put on his sea costume and was ready as soon as his companions. When Ned was dressed, I re-entered the drawing room where the panes of glass were open and posted near console. I examined the ambient beds that supported the Nautilus. Some instants after, we saw a dozen of the crew set foot on the bank of ice, and among them Ned Land, easily known by his stature. Captain Nemo was with them. Before proceeding to dig the walls, he took the soundings to be sure of working in the right direction. Long sounding lines were sunk in the side walls, but after 15 yards they were again stopped by the thick wall. It was useless to attack it on the ceiling-like surface, since the iceberg itself measured more than 400 yards in height. Captain Nemo then sounded the lower surface. There, 10 yards of wall separated us from the water. So great was the thickness of the ice field, it was necessary, therefore, to cut from it a piece equal in extent to the waterline of the Nautilus. There were about 6,000 cubic yards to detach, so as to dig a hole by which we could descend to the ice field. The work had begun immediately and carried on with indefatigable energy. Instead of digging round the Nautilus, which would have involved greater difficulty, Captain Nemo had an immense trench made at 8 yards from the port quarter. Then the men set to work simultaneously with their screw on several points of its circumference. Presently the pickaxe attacked this compact matter vigorously, and large blocks were detached from the mass. By a curious effect of specific gravity, these blocks, lighter than water, fled, so to speak, to the vault of the tunnel that increased in thickness at the top in proportion as it diminished at the base. But that mattered little, so long as the lower part grew thinner. After 2 hours' hard work, Ned Land came in exhausted. He and his comrades were replaced by new workers whom Consul and I joined. The second lieutenant of the Nautilus superintended us. The water seemed singularly cold, but I soon got warm handling the pickaxe. My movements were free enough, although they were made under a pressure of 30 atmospheres. When I re-entered after working 2 hours to take some food and rest, I found a perceptible difference between the pure fluid with which the Roquerolles engine supplied me and the atmosphere of the Nautilus, already charged with carbonic acid. The air had not been renewed for 48 hours, and its vivifying qualities were considerably enfeebled. However, after a lapse of 12 hours, we had only raised a block of ice 1 yard thick on the marked surface, which was about 600 cubic yards. Reckoning that it took 12 hours to accomplish this much, it would take 5 nights and 4 days to bring this enterprise to a satisfactory conclusion. 5 nights and 4 days. And we have only air enough for 2 days in the reservoirs, without taking into account, said Ned, that even if we get out of this infernal prison, we shall also be imprisoned under the iceberg, shut out from all possible communication with the atmosphere. True enough. Who could then foresee the minimum of time necessary for our deliverance? We might be suffocated before the Nautilus could regain the surface of the waves. Was it destined to perish in this ice tomb with all those it enclosed? The situation was terrible, but everyone had looked the danger in the face, and each was determined to do his duty to the last. As I expected, during the night, a new block of yard square was carried away, and still further sank the immense hollow. But in the morning, when dressed in my cork jacket, I traversed the slushy mass. At a temperature of 6 or 7 degrees below zero, I remarked that the side walls were gradually closing in. The beds of water farthest from the trench that were not warmed by the men's work showed a tendency to solidification. In presence of this new and imminent danger, what would become of our chances of safety, and how hinder the solidification of this liquid medium that would burst the partitions of the Nautilus like glass? I did not tell my companions of this new danger. What was the good of damping the energy they displayed in the painful work of escape? But when I went on board again, I told Captain Nemo of this grave complication. I know it, he said, in that calm tone which could counteract the most terrible apprehensions. It is one danger more, but I see no way of escaping it. The only chance of safety is to go quicker than solidification. We must be beforehand with it, that is all. On this day, for several hours, I used my pickaxe vigorously. The work kept me up. Besides, to work was to quit the Nautilus and breathe directly the pure air drawn from the reservoirs and supplied by our apparatus, and to quit the impoverished and vitiated atmosphere. Toward evening, the trench was dug 1 yard deeper. When I returned on board, I was nearly suffocated by the carbonic acid with which the air was filled. Ah! If we had only the chemical means to drive away this deleterious gas. We had plenty of oxygen. All this water contained a considerable quantity, and by dissolving it with our powerful piles, it would restore the vivifying fluid. I think that if Geordie LaForge had been there, they would have taken the oxygen out of the water and found a way to pump that into the ship. I'm sure that would have happened. I had the thought well over it, but of what good was that, since the carbonic acid produced by our respiration had invaded every part of the vessel? To absorb it, it was necessary to fill some jars with caustic potash and to shake them incessantly. Now the substance was wanting on board, and nothing could replace it. On that evening, Captain Nemo ought to open the taps of his reservoirs and let some pure air into the interior of the Nautilus. Without this precaution, we must not get rid of the sense of suffocation. The next day, March 26th, I resumed my miner's work, beginning the 5th yard. The side walls and the lower surface of the iceberg thickened visibly. It was evident that they would meet before the Nautilus was able to disengage itself. Despair seized me for an instant. My pickaxe nearly fell from my hands. What was the good of digging if I must be suffocated, crushed by the water that was turning into stone? A punishment that the ferocity of the savages even would not have invented. Just then, Captain Nemo passed near me. I touched his hand and showed him the walls of our prison. The wall to port had advanced to at least 4 yards from the hull of the Nautilus. The captain understood me and signaled me to follow him. We went on board. I took off my cork jacket and accompanied him into the drawing room. Monsieur Aronnax, we must attempt some desperate means, or we shall be sealed up in this solidified water as in cement. Yes, but what is to be done? Ah, if my Nautilus were strong enough to bear this pressure without being crushed. Well, I asked, not catching the captain's idea. Do you not understand, he replied, that this congelation of water will help us? Do you not see that by its solidification, it would burst through this field of ice that imprisons us, as when it freezes, it bursts the hardest stones? Do you not perceive that it would be an agent of safety instead of destruction? Yes, Captain, perhaps, but whatever resistance to crushing the Nautilus possesses, it could not support this terrible pressure and would be flattened like an iron plate. I know it, sir. Therefore, we must not reckon on the aid of nature, but on our own exertions. We must stop this solidification. Not only will the side walls be pressed together, but there is not 10 feet of water before or behind the Nautilus. The congelation gains on us on all sides. How long will the air in the reservoirs last for us to breathe on board? The captain looked in my face. After tomorrow, they will be empty. A cold sweat came over me. However, ought I to have been astonished at the answer? On March 22nd, the Nautilus was in the open polar seas. We were at 26 degrees. For 5 days we had lived on the reserve on board, and what was left of the respirable air must be kept for the workers. Even now, as I write, my recollection is still so vivid that an involuntary terror seizes me, and my lungs seem to be without air. Meanwhile, Captain Nemo reflected silently, and evidently an idea had struck him, but he seemed to reject it. At last, these words escaped his lips. "Boiling water," he muttered. "Boiling water?" I cried. "Yes, sir. We are enclosed in a space that is relatively confined. Would not jets of boiling water constantly injected by the pumps raise the temperature in this part and stay the congelation?" "Let us try it," I said resolutely. "Let us try it, Professor." The thermometer then stood at 7 degrees outside. Captain Nemo took me to the galleys where the vast distillatory machines stood that furnished the drinkable water by evaporation. They filled these with water, and all the electric heat from the piles was thrown through the worms, bathed in the liquid. In a few minutes, this water reached 100 degrees. It was directed toward the pumps, while fresh water replaced it in proportion. The heat developed by the troughs was such that cold water, drawn up from the sea after only having gone through the machines, came boiling into the body of the pump. The injection was begun, and 3 hours after the thermometer marked 6 degrees below zero outside, 1 degree was gained. 2 hours later, the thermometer only marked 4 degrees. "We shall succeed," I said to the captain, after having anxiously watched the result on the operation. "I think," he answered, "that we shall not be crushed. We have no more suffocation to fear." During the night, the temperature of the water rose to 1 degree below zero. The injections could not carry it to a higher point. But as the congelation of the seawater produces at least 2 degrees, I was at least reassured against the dangers of solidification. The next day, March 27th, 6 yards of ice had been cleared, 12 feet only remaining to be cleared away. There was yet 48 hours' work. The air could not be renewed in the interior of the Nautilus, and this day would make it worse. An intolerable weight oppressed me. Toward 3 o'clock in the evening, this feeling rose to a violent degree. Yawns dislocated my jaws. My lungs panted as they inhaled this burning fluid, which became rarefied more and more. A moral torpor took hold of me. I was powerless, almost unconscious. My brave consul, though exhibiting the same symptoms and suffering in the same manner, never left me. He took my hand and encouraged me, and I heard him murmur, "Oh, if I could only not breathe so as to leave more air for my master." That's Consul right there. Tears came into my eyes on hearing him speak thus. If our situation to all was intolerable in the interior, with what haste and gladness would we put on our cork jackets to work in our turn? Pickaxes sounded on the frozen ice beds. Our arms ached. The skin was torn off our hands. But what were these fatigues? What did the wounds matter? Vital air came to the lungs. We breathed. We breathed. All this time, no one prolonged his voluntary task beyond the prescribed time. His task accomplished, each one handed in turn to his panting companions the apparatus that supplied him with life. Captain Nemo set the example and submitted first to this severe discipline. When the time came, he gave up his apparatus to another and returned to the vitiated air on board, calm, unflinching, unmurmuring. On that day, the ordinary work was accomplished with unusual vigor. Only 2 yards remained to be raised from the surface. 2 yards only separated us from the open sea. But the reservoirs were nearly emptied of air. The little that remained ought to be kept for the workers, not a particle for the Nautilus. When I went back on board, I was half suffocated. What a night! I know not how to describe it. The next day, my breathing was oppressed. Dizziness accompanied the pain in my head and made me like a drunken man. My companions showed the same symptoms. Some of the crew had rattling in the throat. On that day, the 6th of our imprisonment, Captain Nemo, finding the pickaxes work too slowly, resolved to crush the ice bed that still separated us from the liquid sheet. This man's coolness and energy never forsook him. He subdued his physical pains by moral force. By his orders, the vessel was lightened, that is to say, raised from the ice bed by a change of specific gravity. When it floated, they towed it so as to bring it above the immense trench made on the level of the waterline. Then, filling his reservoirs of water, he descended and shut himself up in the hole. Just then, all the crew came on board, and the double door of communication was shut. The Nautilus then rested on the bed of ice, which was not yet 1 yard thick, and which the sounding leads had perforated in 1,000 places. The taps of the reservoirs were then opened, and 100 cubic yards of water was let in, increasing the weight of the Nautilus to 1,800 tons. We waited, we listened, forgetting our sufferings in hope. Our safety depended on this last chance. Notwithstanding the buzzing in my head, I soon heard the humming sound under the hull of the Nautilus. The ice cracked with a singular noise like tearing paper, and the Nautilus sank. "We're off," murmured Consul in my ear. I could not answer him. I seized his hand and pressed it convulsively. All at once, carried away by its frightful overcharge, the Nautilus sank like a bullet under the waves. That is to say, it fell as if it was in a vacuum. Then all the electric force was put on the pumps that soon began to let the water out of the reservoirs. After some minutes, our fall was stopped. Soon, too, the manometer indicated an ascending movement. The screw, going at full speed, made the iron hull tremble to its very bolts, and drew us toward the north. But if this floating under the iceberg is to last another day before we reach the open sea, I shall be dead first. Half stretched up upon a divan in the library, I was suffocating. My face was purple, my lips blue, my faculties suspended. I neither saw nor heard. All notion of time had gone from my head. My muscles could not contract. I do not know how many hours passed thus, but I was conscious of the agony that was coming over me. I felt as if I was going to die. Suddenly, I came to. Some breaths of air penetrated my lungs. Had we risen to the surface of the waves? Were we free of the icebergs? No. Ned and Consul, my two brave friends, were sacrificing themselves to save me. Some particles of air still remained at the bottom of one apparatus. Instead of using it, they had kept it for me, and while they were being suffocated, they gave me life, drop by drop. I wanted to push back the thing. They held my hands, and for some moments I breathed freely. I looked at the clock. It was 11 in the morning. It ought to be the 28th of March. The Nautilus went at frightful pace, 40 miles an hour. It literally tore through the water. Where was Captain Nemo? Had he succumbed? Were his companions dead with him? At the moment, the manometer indicated that we were not more than 20 feet from the surface. A mere plate of ice separated us from the atmosphere. Could we not break it? Perhaps. In any case, the Nautilus was going to attempt it. I felt that it was in an oblique position, lowering the stern and raising the bows. The introduction of water had been the means of disturbing its equilibrium. Then, impelled by its powerful screw, it attacked the ice field from beneath like a formidable battering ram. It broke it by backing and then rushing forward against the field, which gradually gave way, and at last, dashing suddenly against it, shot forwards on the ice field that crushed beneath its weight. The panel was opened, one might say torn off, and the pure air came in abundance to all parts of the Nautilus. Chapter 17, From Cape Horn to the Amazon. How I got on the platform, I have no idea. Perhaps the Canadian had carried me there, but I breathed, I inhaled the vivifying sea air. My two companions were getting drunk with the fresh particles. The other unhappy men had been so long without food that they could not with impunity indulge in the simplest ailments that were given them. We, on the contrary, had no end to restrain ourselves. We could draw this air freely into our lungs, and it was the breeze alone that filled us with this keen enjoyment. Ah, said Consul, how delightful this oxygen is! Master need not fear to breathe it. There is enough for everybody. Ned Land did not speak, but he opened his jaws wide enough to frighten a shark. Strength soon returned, and when I looked round me, I saw we were alone on the platform. The foreign seamen in the Nautilus were contented with the air that circulated in the interior. None of them had come to drink in the open air. The first words I spoke were words of gratitude and thankfulness to my two companions. Ned and Consul had prolonged my life during the last hours of this long agony. All my gratitude could not repay such devotion. My friends, I said, we are bound one to the other forever, and I am under infinite obligations to you. Which I shall take advantage of, exclaimed the Canadian. What do you mean? said Consul. I mean that I shall take you with me when I leave this infernal Nautilus. Well, said Consul, after all this, are we going right? Yes, I replied, for we are going the way of the sun, and here the sun is north. No doubt, said Ned Land, but it remains to be seen whether he will bring the ship into the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean, that is, into the frequented or deserted seas. I could not answer that question, and I feared that Captain Nemo would rather take us to the vast ocean that touches the coast of Asia and America at the same time. He would thus complete the tour round the submarine world and return to those waters in which the Nautilus could sail freely. We ought before long to settle this important point. The Nautilus went at a rapid pace. The polar circle was soon passed, and the course shaped for Cape Horn. We were off the American point. March 31st, at 7 o'clock in the evening, then all our past sufferings were forgotten. The remembrance of that imprisonment in the ice was effaced from our minds. We only thought of the future. Captain Nemo did not appear again either in the drawing room or on the platform. The point shown each day on the planisphere and marked by the lieutenant showed me the exact direction of the Nautilus. Now, on that evening, it was evident to my great satisfaction that we were going back to the north by the Atlantic. The next day, April 1st, when the Nautilus ascended to the surface some minutes before noon, we sighted land to the west. It was Terra del Fuego, which the first navigators named thus from seeing the quantity of smoke that rose from the natives' huts. The coast seemed low to me, but in the distance rose high mountains. I even thought I had a glimpse of Mount Sarmiento that rises 2,070 yards above the level of the sea, with a very pointed summit, which, according as it is misty or clear, is a sign of fine or wet weather. At this moment, the peak was clearly defined against the sky. The Nautilus, diving again under the water, approached the coast, which was only some few miles off. From the glass windows in the drawing room, I saw long seaweeds and gigantic fuci and varech, of which the open polar sea contained so many specimens. With their sharp polished filaments, they measured about 300 yards in length, real cables thicker than one's thumb, and having great tenacity, they are often used as ropes for vessels. Another weed known as velp, with its leaves 4 feet long, buried in the coral concretions, hung at the bottom. It served as nest and food for myriads of crustacea and mollusks, crabs, and cuttlefish. There, seals and otters had splendid repasts, eating the flesh of fish with sea vegetables according to the English fashion. Over this fertile and luxuriant ground, the Nautilus passed with great rapidity. Toward evening, it approached the Falkland group, the rough summits of which I recognized the following day. The depth of the sea was moderate. On the shore, our nets brought in the beautiful specimens of seaweed, and particularly a certain fucus, the roots of which were filled with the best mussels in the world. Geese and ducks fell by the dozens on the platform, and soon took their places in the pantry on board. When the last heights of the Falklands had disappeared from the horizon, the Nautilus sank to between 20 and 25 yards and followed the American coast. Captain Nemo did not show himself until the 3rd of April. We did not quit the shores of Patagonia, sometimes under the ocean, sometimes at the surface. The Nautilus passed beyond the large estuary formed by the Uruguay. Its direction was northward and followed the long windings of the coast of South America, which is like America, but south. I did add that in. We had then made 1,600 miles since our embarkation in the seas of Japan. About 11 o'clock in the morning, the Tropic of Capricorn was crossed on the 37th meridian, and we passed Cape Frio, standing out to the sea. Captain Nemo, to Ned Land's great displeasure, did not like the neighborhood of the inhabited coasts of Brazil, for we went at a giddy speed. Not a fish, not a bird of the swiftest kind could follow us, and the natural curiosities of these seas escaped all observation. This speed was kept up for several days, and in the evening of the 9th of April, we sighted the most westerly point of South America that forms Cape San Roque. But then the Nautilus swerved again and sought the lowest depth of the submarine valley, which is between the Cape and Sierra Leone on the African coast. This valley bifurcates to the parallel of the Antilles and terminates at the mouth by the enormous depression of 9,000 yards. In this place, the geological basin of the ocean forms as far as the Lesser Antilles a cliff 3.5 miles perpendicular in height, and in the parallel of the Cape Verde Islands. Another wall not less considerable that encloses thus all the sunk continent of the Atlantic. The bottom of this immense valley is dotted with some mountains that give to these submarine places a picturesque aspect. I speak, moreover, from the manuscript charts that were in the library of the Nautilus, charts evidently due to the Captain Nemo's hand and made after his personal observations. For 2 days the desert and deep waters were visited by means of the inclined planes. The Nautilus was furnished with long diagonal broadsides which carried it to all elevations. But on the 11th of April it rose suddenly, and land appeared at the mouth of the Amazon River, a vast estuary, the embouchure of which is so considerable that it freshens the sea water for the distance of several leagues. The equator was crossed. 20 miles to the west were the Guineas, a French territory on which we could have found an easy refuge. But a stiff breeze was blowing, and the furious waves would not have allowed a single boat to face them. Ned Land understood that, no doubt, for he spoke not a word about it. For my part, I made no allusion to his schemes of flight, for I would not urge him to make an attempt that must inevitably fail. I made the time pass pleasantly by interesting studies. During the days of April 11th and 12th, the Nautilus did not leave the surface of the sea, and the net brought in a marvelous haul of zoophytes, fish, and reptiles. Some zoophytes had been fished up by the chain of nets. They were, for the most part, beautiful Pictalines, belonging to the Actinidian family, and among other species of the Pictalis protecta, peculiar to that part of the ocean, with a little cylindrical trunk ornamented with vertical lines, speckled with red dots, crowning a marvelous blossoming of tentacles. As to the mollusks, they consisted of some I had already observed, turritellas, olive porphyras with regular lines intercrossed, with red spots standing out plainly against the flesh, odd pteroceras like petrified scorpions, translucid hyalaeas, argonauts, cuttlefish, excellent eating, and certain species of calmars the naturalists of antiquity have classed amongst the flying fish, and that serve principally for bait for cod fishing. I had now an opportunity of studying several species of fish on these shores. Amongst the cartilaginous ones, Petromyzones prica, a sort of eel 15 inches long, with a greenish head, violet fins, gray-blue back, brown belly, silvered and sewn with bright spots, the pupil of the eye encircled with gold, a curious animal that the current of the Amazon had drawn to the sea, for they inhabit fresh waters, tuberculated streaks with pointed snouts and a long, loose tail, armed with a long, jagged sting, little sharks, a yard long, gray and whitish skin, and several rows of teeth bent back that are generally known by the name of Pantouflus vespertilios, a kind of red isosceles triangle, half a yard long, to which pectorals are attached by fleshy prolongations that make them look like bats, but that are their horny appendage situated near the nostrils has given them the name of sea unicorns. Lastly, some species of ballast jay, the Curassivian, whose spots were of a brilliant gold color, and the Capriscus of clear violet, and with varying shades like a pigeon's throat. I end here this catalogue, which is somewhat dry perhaps, but very exact, with a series of bony fish that I observed in passing belonging to the Apteronotes, and whose snout is white as snow, the body of a beautiful black, marked with a very long, loose, fleshy strip. Odontoceti tognathes, armed with spikes, sardines 9 inches long, glittering with a bright silver light, a species of mackerel provided with 2 anal fins, centronotes of a blackish tint that are fished for with torches, long fish 2 yards in length with flat flesh, white and firm, which when they arc fresh taste like eel, and when dry like smoked salmon, labris, half red, covered with scales only at the bottom of the dorsal and anal fins, chrysoptera, on which gold and silver blend their brightness with that of the ruby and topaz, golden tailored spares, the flesh of which is extremely delicate and whose phosphorescent properties betray them in the midst of the waters, orange-colored spares with long tongues, myagres with gold caudal fins, dark thorntails, anableps of Suriname, etc. Notwithstanding this, etc., I must not omit to mention fish that Consul will long remember, and with good reason. One of our nets had hauled up a sort of very flat ray fish, which, with the tail cut off, formed a perfect disc, and weighed 20 ounces. It was white underneath, red above, with large round spots of dark blue encircled with black, very glossy skin, terminating in a bilobed fin. Laid out on the platform, it struggled, tried to turn itself by convulsive movements, and made so many efforts that one last turn had nearly sent it into the sea. But Consul, not wishing to let the fish go, rushed to it, and before I could prevent him, had seized it with both hands. In a moment he was overthrown, his legs in the air, and half his body paralyzed, crying, "Oh, master, master, help me!" It was the first time the poor boy had spoken to me so familiarly. The Canadian and I took him up, and rubbed his contracted arms till he became sensible. The unfortunate Consul had attacked a crampfish of the most dangerous kind, the cumina. This odd animal, in the medium conductor like water, strikes fish at several yards distance, so great is the power of its electric organ, the 2 principal surfaces of which do not measure less than 27 square feet. The next day, April 12th, the Nautilus approached the Dutch coast near the mouth of the Maroni. There, several groups of sea cows herded together. There were manatees that, like the dugong and the Stellaria, belonged to the Skinnian order. These beautiful animals, peaceable and inoffensive, from 18 to 21 feet in length, weigh at least 1,600 weight. I told Ned Land and Consul that provident nature had assigned an important role to these mammalia. Indeed, they, like the seals, are designed to graze on the submarine prairies, and thus destroy the accumulation of weed that obstructs the tropical rivers. And do you know, I added, what has been the result since men have almost entirely annihilated this useful race? That the putrefied weeds have poisoned the air, and the poisoned air causes the yellow fever that desolates these beautiful countries. Enormous vegetations are multiplied under the torrid seas, and the evil is irresistibly developed from the mouth of the Rio de la Plata to Florida. If we are to believe Tossanel, this plague is nothing to what it would be if the seas were cleaned of whales and seals. Then, infested with pulps, medusae, and cuttlefish, they would become immense centers of infection, since their waves would not possess these vast stomachs that God had charged to infest the surface of the seas. Chapter 18 is called The Pulps, and I think we better read that tomorrow. Who wants to go on? Daniel? Might be asleep. Not asleep. JJ says keep going, Kimmy. Kimmy's good either way, so place your comments. Let me know what you want me to do. You too, who are faithful and listening, tell me what to do. This is the choose your own adventure part of the story. We're on chapter 18, The Pulps. The first word is for. Right, I've 1, 2. Oh, lots of dialogue that makes the pages go faster. It is a lot of pages. I think we should probably save it for tomorrow. I was hoping we could finish tomorrow because I will not be able to do this on, what day is it? Thursday. But it looks like we're probably going to finish on Friday. So I hope you're okay with that. So tomorrow we will pick up with chapter 18, the pulps. The first word is for, and I hope that you tune in for me for a Heavy D storytelling tomorrow. Can you rub your belly and pat your head? Yes. Okay, so there you go. I hope that you're able to tune in tomorrow for the pulps, and the first word is for. And at this time, I'm going to bid you adieu, and I hope that you have a great time, and we'll read another story tomorrow.